observing lists and eyepiece cleaning on episode 464 of the Actual Astronomy podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for everybody who likes going out under the stars. So, Shane, did you get any observing in this week?
Nope, no chance. I guess a little naked eye,
Yeah.
like I've seen Jupiter, I've seen Venus, saw Mars a little bit. Um, that's about it though.
Yeah.
It's been very cloudy and very sort of fluctuating poor conditions, like it almost every night starts off cloudy and then it's, a couple nights we've had it clear up at different points, but it just really hasn't supported observing very much.
Yeah.
How about you? Have you been able to catch any of the sucker holes or clear
No.
moments?
No, the only night that it and it's not even as though it's been predicted. It's just been ran. It's like it's so cloudy that the only times it's clear is just when there's so many clouds that they kind of accidentally make a clear spot. I think
Hmm.
is the best way to put it. And yeah, there was that bit of a clear spell that came through on Saturday morning, but had been out to a work function, so I was out at my cabin just that particular Friday night, of course, and couldn't take advantage of it anyway. So yeah, we continue to hold the vigil, I guess, for some clear skies. Sadly,
Yeah, hopefully it comes soon. It's frustrating to miss out on some of the winter constellations as well as
mm.
the planetary showcase that is happening with Jupiter and Mars right now.
Yeah, yeah. Any neat bobs or bits arrive in the mail for you, or are you still waiting on
Mhm.
stuff?
I'm just waiting on that 14 millimeter TMB super mono.
Hmm.
So that may come this week, but I don't know. I arranged shipping, I think on Friday. So
Okay.
usually it only takes a few days after that. But,
Awesome.
with it being the holiday season, there's an awful lot of boxes and parcels in transit. So
Yeah.
sometimes, I think it slows down the whole process because of the volume.
Yeah. Yeah. No, true enough. My little counterweight finally did arrive. It took 5 days to deliver it once it was in Regina.
Well, okay.
I think they literally, I don't know if it got lost in a truck or like it's small. Like Mike was saying when we were chatting on the phone, it's heavy, but it's small and it would tend to fall in between boxes. And I don't know if they were just kind of throwing, oh, we'll throw it on top. And then like when they get here, because they did drive up and the guy would go like rummaging around in the back and never come to the door and say anything and just take off again. So it made me think that it had just fallen in behind something. But anyhow, it took I had to call them and call them and call them to finally get them to deliver it. So I wasn't too impressed with the old folks at FedEx there that time. But anyway, hopefully things get better.
And this counterweight is for the observatory mount to counterbalance the 7 inch. Is that
It's
correct?
it's not for the mount. It's for
Okay.
the scope. So
Oh, right. It goes on the dovetail.
yeah, it goes. So there's two dovetails on my scope. They're both 14-inch length Laws Mandy, so D style. And because the lens element on a 7-inch refractor is so darn heavy, being probably close to 20 pounds of the 30-pound weight of the scope, you have to kind of choke the scope way up on the dovetail. In fact, even up virtually all of the way, and there's a bit of a stop there. You don't want to put it right at the end. It's still not balanced when there's nothing in it. When you have a diagonal and like a 22 Nagler and your finder scope on, that's balanced. But then if you go changing eyepieces around, unlike with my 5-inch or 4-inch or any other scopes I put in there, and things get a little bit out of balance, you can just kind of just level the scope and slide the tube along. You can't do that with a 7-inch refractor. That is a
Mhm.
major operation requiring like three people and a helmet. And yeah, so what this does is it can go on either the inside dovetail, or you can put it on the outside and then slide it up and down to balance depending on what eyepieces and such that you're mounting to the telescope.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Interesting.
yeah, yeah, it's sort of one of those things. I'm not exactly sure how it works, so I'm hoping you or Mike can come out the first night we do it because it's probably have to figure out how it actually like where the balance point would be first. Like you need like your starting point.
Mhm.
Anyhow, uh, I thought with the bigger refractors it would balance easier, but it doesn't. It balances no easier than like a 60 millimeter f7 does. So that's the way it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The one thing I did get to try out was I bought it's on sale at Canadian Tire. It was a semi truck snow brush.
Give you some extra reach.
Yeah, for cleaning off the rails.
Hmm.
So on the roll off roof, there's rails that the roof rolls off onto, and they have this track, and the track sits up. So so really, unless you get a lot of ice, typically the ice isn't going to be that thick. They set up almost an inch. There's quite a bit of ice on them, but mostly you get the little bit of ice and then the snow. And so you can kind of go along them with the brush, and that knocked all the snow off super easy. Took like a minute to do each one. And then there is some ice there, but I think it would be fine. But where the ice is building up, I think I was texting you a mic, is there's like a bit of a gap where the roof sort of comes over the rails. And when the rain or snow comes in from that side, which is the dominant rain and wind snow side, it's sort of accumulating in a little spot just behind the wheels. And so we need to get some above zero weather to melt that. And then my builder looked at it and he's like, "Oh, I just need to put like a tiny little board on either side, and that's going to solve that problem or mostly solve it." So, I mean, if there's a little bit of ice or whatever, I mean, those wheels will just crush it and go through it.
Hmm.
They're really designed for that. It's an outdoor gate track, so unless you have more than about 3/4 of an inch of ice, they're okay. But these are like little like good solid hunks of ice that are there, so it's just too much. So anyway, so he's got an idea for how to do it. It is supposed to be -2 today, -5 or -6 tomorrow. I don't know. That might be warm enough to do it. He's going to go and check, he said. So we'll see.
Hmm. Well, that's good. Iron out all of the kinks. As you get sort of a full cycle with the observatory, I'm sure you might have a couple other discoveries too to correct.
Yeah, he put in that header foam that because we were getting some water in the summer and then some snow drifting in. And what happens is it's opened. The roof kind of has a bit of an overhang, nothing too much. Typically, people build their roll-offs without any overhang, but he wanted to put a small one for a variety of good reasons. But there's a little bit of a gap there. It's very small, but just when the wind is blowing and the snow or the rain is pounding super hard, then we will get some of that stuff coming in. So he put a little bit of foam up, and that will take care of the majority of that. If I was doing it again, I'm not sure. It's tough because, as you know, Shane, it gets pretty hot here in the summer, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you don't put a small overhang here, um, like the heat in a building will just skyrocket. It's way too much. So you'll even see here, I'd never hardly seen these before, but here people will even have little overhangs over their windows, especially like down in the grasslands. Like everybody has like a little overhang over their window because the sun is very high here at our latitude, and it can get very hot anyway. And the combination of the two coming in through a window is just way too much, eh?
Hmm. Hmm.
So he built just a small overhang around the building, kind of like that, so that it just doesn't get as screaming hot in the summer. But then, of course, the other thing it does is it allows more airflow, which is also good for keeping it cool in the summer. But the flip side is in the winter, and in rainy weather, it can tend to allow a little bit of moisture, and it's not crazy amounts. It's just a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah, but this was my hesitation to put in the 7 inch in though, because now he's trying to work in there with a giant telescope in there. So that makes me nervous because he's in there with like ladder going and everything, and like he's careful, but he's not used to working around telescopes, and I'm sure it'll be fine. But it's not as easy as well to work in there with a giant. When the little scopes are in there and they could easily be popped in and out, I would just be taking them out. And then, but this is like, you just can't go and take this out. Like, that ain't happening. He can't just go and take it down and put it back up, even. Like, it takes some significant muscle. So, need really three people to do it. So, anyway, so he's just working around that, which is a little bit of a pain in the ass. So, anyhow.
Right
Uh,
on.
Yeah, couple notes. I mentioned this to you before we recorded on RASC publications. I'm involved with anyway. Is that we've got this postal strike here in Canada with the aptly named Canada Post.
Yeah, about 3 weeks now.
Yeah, about 4 weeks today, actually. 15th of
Okay.
November is when they start it.
It sounds like they might be legislated back to work maybe this week.
Sounds like it. Sounds like it. But because of that, there's been a delay in getting me my copies of the RASC Observer's Calendar, which I'm the editor of, and which I edit this each year. And anyhow, the good news is that if because of the exchange rate, if you're in the States, there's a bundle sale with the Observer's Calendar and Observer's Handbook, and they'll courier it down to you for a few bucks. But it's $44 US, I think, US for each. And with the exchange rate, that is not quite a buy one get one free situation, but it's a pretty good deal, I think, because I think currently it's like a 32% benefit to the American dollar on the exchange. So that's kind of a good thing. If people want, they can order one or the both of those, because I'm going to reference those a little bit here in this episode.
They're charging $44 American for a calendar?
Both the calendar and the handbook.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. That's what makes it a good deal. So the calendar itself is usually $23 plus tax and shipping and stuff, and then the handbook is, I think, around 30 or $32. And I think they basically equate them both the same, but then they've got this special deal on, and there's US versions now, hey? So
Yeah.
there's some special stuff in the Observer's Handbook. And then with the calendar, we've made it sort of more North American friendly versus just Canadian centric. So I've
Mhm.
been doing some work on that. So not that our sales in the US are huge. Maybe they will be at some point in time. Who knows? But if people do want them, then yeah, I think it's a fairly good deal to get both for that price.
Yeah, yeah, sounds like a decent savings.
Yeah, like I said, considering 22 and 32 is what, like around $54 and 50 cents or something, I think. And so there's about 10 or $12 off once you factor all this stuff in. So pretty good deal.
Yeah.
Um, so observing lists. So we had a quick chat about maybe talking about observing lists, Shane.
Yeah, I was thinking kind of what are we doing to prepare for next year? That's often what we do in the winter because observing time is usually reduced due to weather and cloud.
Usually not this
And
bad, but
yeah, yeah. So, typically we work on new observing lists and sometimes just getting our gear organized, cleaned, modified, whatever it might be. So, thought we could talk about some of that today.
and where are you at on this?
Just in sort of like that overall process.
Yeah,
I really haven't started anything, but I have some time off over the holiday season, about a week and a half. So I'll start tackling a couple of little projects. One I mentioned a little bit ago, and that's just revectoring my little suitcase observatory now that I have the 90 millimeter FL from Borg. My previous suitcase observatory was based on the 71 millimeter Borg, and the 71 is certainly a much smaller form factor than the 90, although the 90 really is still quite small, but there's a noticeable difference between the two. So I want to do that. And then I usually like to just inspect my eyepieces, see if any of them need a cleaning. Some of the orthos or monocentric eyepieces that I use have a very or can have a pretty narrow eye relief. So sometimes your eyelashes are making contact with the glass and leave some oils behind. And I'd like to keep on top of that over the winter as well. And, I'll have a quick look at the refractor lenses, but it's quite rare that I would ever touch those. They don't seem to get as messy as an eyepiece. Eyepieces seem to attract all sorts of oil and dirt. And in my opinion, anyway, they often require more frequent cleaning than any sort of objective does on a telescope.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. And how about for observing lists?
I don't think I'm pursuing anything new at this time. I still want to continue working through some double star lists, both the RASC list and then within the Cambridge double star atlas. There's I can't remember if it's a top 100 or a top 200, but I'd like to start going through those. And then the hidden treasures from O'Meara is kind of my dark sky list that I will continue to chunk away at whenever I'm able to get out under a dark sky.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. This year in the Observer's Handbook, you'll find my text and Randall's chart for Perseus.
Oh, that's interesting. So now you're telling me I have to open the book up.
There you go. Yeah, you should open the book up. I don't know what page it's on there, but you can find it as our featured constellation. If you're just going to flip through, I think it's like literally in the back 20 or so pages. But each year, as you would know, Shane, and some listeners may know, Randall and I focus on a different constellation or a region of the sky, depending. Like one year we did like the summer Milky Way. And this year we chose Perseus because I'd been able to get a lot of observing time in Perseus in late 2023. And anyway, it does get confusing in my life because I'm working on stuff for the handbook and like about a year, sometimes more in advance, and the same for the calendar. So when I'm trying to talk and line things up, it can kind of get confusing because I was explaining something to somebody and I was like, oh, well, in 2023, I did this for 2024, but it's still 2024. So kind of gets confusing. And we're trying to line some stuff up now for 2026, which seems like it's 2 years away, but we'll probably not really start working on it till next month, which is 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Such is my life. All right. I won't read the text. And I think what people ought to do if they are interested in this is you can just buy the handbook and read the text. But I did put a graphic in showing, I think most of the objects that focused on there in Perseus. And I'm not sure what we're going to select for 2026. But I need some good skies because usually I do the observations in the fall, the previous year of whatever constellation I've so chosen, and then do a bunch of sketches and kind of write it up, sort of very very much later the following year. However, we just didn't get the skies this late summer or fall, and then for a period of time there, my observatory was out of commission. Then when it come back in commission, I would just be enjoying the observing in it versus trying to do anything too serious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
So the bit about Perseus, though, we talk about like the huge Melat 20 open cluster around Murphak or Alpha Persei. Um, Talk about Stock 2, Trumpler 2, and the double cluster. I think talk about Miram, which is an interesting star there, and the M76 little dumbbell. Talk about Messier 34, but then there's a little like sort of almost like belt of Orion set of galaxies there, NGCs 1003, 1023, and 1058, and then kind of loop back past Algol to Perseus A, and then there's some double stars across the bottom, and then there's the NGC 1491, which is kind of neat because I think it's called like the fossil footprint or something like that. Did you ever see that?
No, I haven't.
And then there's that big open cluster NGC 1528, which you and I observed for the first time out past Moose Jaw one night. I remember back probably
Hmm.
15 years ago.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Yeah. And then we got California Nebula, a bunch of Barnard objects around there. And a couple nebula around there as well. And then there's the big, huge nebula, which is the closest planetary nebula as Sharpless 2-216 down towards Capella. Closest or second closest? I say in the text. Like I said, I'm not going to read from the text. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. So anyway, hopefully, and I observe most of the objects, and then as I go through and write it up, I think, oh, I should have looked at this and I should have looked at that. So I think this two of the galaxies and something else, couple of the stars, I didn't get a chance to take a look at. So I'm hoping that over the Christmas break here, I get an opportunity to have some clear skies and can finally stretch the legs of the refractor.
Right on.
Yeah. So been chatting with listener Tyler about the Wide Field Wonders list that's published in the RASC Observer's Handbook. Anyway, I published this probably going back 10 or so years ago now. I'm not sure if you ever had a chance to take a look at that list, Shane.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We've talked about that a few times, and it's a nice list. There's a lot of good objects there.
Yeah, it's got a lot of different things, but when I wrote it up, it was just sort of something I worked on with Dave Chapman, who's been on the show, and then we refined it a little bit with it sort of in mind that it wouldn't be like a certificate program or anything like that. And I added in it was a bit of a mix between wide field objects and favorite objects. And since that time, though, like I've made tons more observations, of course, in the past, 8 years anyway. Um, so it's a bit of a time for a revision. I had always intended to maybe even revise it every year, but for want of time, it's never materialized because typically I'm trying to write up the constellation for the feature that we've selected, that year, producing the observer's calendar, and so this just ends up being a little bit on my never pile. So I've been chatting with Tyler a fair bit, and he's pretty much worked his way through all the objects using a Takahashi 76 DCU. So that's no small feat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I like that.
Um, yeah, because small scope and many of these objects are considered tough. Some objects like Simius 147 are extremely tough, requiring not only very dark, transparent skies, but also a fair bit of observing experience trying to see faint stuff in those conditions. So anyway, Tyler and I have been communicating. I'll just read his email here, and then I think that'll sort of illustrate a few things because it's well written and I agree with much of what he has to say. So Tyler writes, "Hi Chris, I am thankful to have some great skies. On a night of good transparency, I can get sixth magnitude stars from my backyard in northwest Arkansas. I am in a neighborhood, but there's a lot of rural land around. I can also go to my family's ranch, which is about 3/4 of an hour away, and the skies are significantly better up there. I still need to get a good measurement of limiting magnitude, but you can see much detail in the Milky Way without any dark adaptation at all. I have seen everything on the list except for a handful of nebulas south of -10 degrees declination. The one Achilles heel of my observing sites is the southern horizon. I've got some pretty big light domes down there." And he goes on to say, "Simius 147 was not easy, but I was able to see two or three of the very bright or the very brightest sections from my backyard when it was at zenith. And that was on a night of excellent transparency. The Witch's Head was definitely among the hardest ones for me, in part, no doubt, because of getting into some of the southern light domes. I really had to work to see that one, even at my dark site. And though that's like my observations pretty much concur with what he writes. And for me, using a 5-inch versus a 3-inch telescope. Tyler goes on to say, "I think that the Wide Field Wonders list is well set up to teach intermediate and advanced observers how to make the transition to wide field. There are a lot of great resources and lists for galaxy hunting, and nearly all the great galaxies are in the NGC. There are a lot fewer resources for wide field observing, as well as a baffling assortment of catalogs and designations. Here are a few things I would like. Here are a few things I like about your list. It introduces you to a wide variety of objects, including asterisms. It introduces most of the key major catalogs. The object plus sub-object format is great. What I mean is that under the object stock 2, there are three sub-objects, both components of the double cluster, and the chain of stars connecting the double cluster to stock 2. This format teaches you to look at the entire field as well as introducing an iterative process. I have been really enjoying revisiting my favorite objects to find new details. I know you can do this with galaxies too, but it feels especially productive with larger, wider field objects. There is something for everyone. I started working on it when all I had was a Maksutov with a 1 degree field of view, and the handful of objects I was able to see convinced me I wanted a more wide field instrument, and that's why I bought a refractor. Most of these objects are ones you won't know about unless you go out of your way to look for them. The objects you choose are really fun, but I have a few ideas for small tweaks to a few of the entries. And he said, which you can take or leave. But I totally agree. The first one he mentions is NGC 206. Not sure if you're familiar with that one, Shane.
Not off the top of my head.
Mm. So this is Star Cloud up in Messier 31. And as Tyler said, it's very small. And he suggests, what do you think about replacing this item with Mel Bartel's Andromeda Shelf Integrated Flux Nebula? And Mel was on the show. I can't remember when or which episode, but he was on the show some time back. And Tyler references this thread in Cloudy Nights. And he says, according to Mel, it is one of the easiest integrated flux nebula in the sky, and Tyler's found it pretty easy. I have also observed it, apparently, though I kind of had forgotten, but was able to source my notes. And you can't really observe the integrated flux nebula without seeing the entire expanse of Andromeda, which definitely fits into the spirit of the list. But he goes on to say NGC 206 would stay on the list, but as a sub-object. So I think what we're talking about here maybe is replacing NGC 206 and saying something like the M31 Integrated Flux Nebula or the Shelf Nebula, and then as part of the whole context, look for NGC 206 within the spiral arms of M31. So, not sure if you've ever tried to see any of this nebulosity around M31 either, Shane. It's this starts to get a little bit obscure, but it's interesting.
Yeah, sounds interesting for sure.
Mm. Other one is Basel 1. So this object is in a really cool field. As Tyler said, it didn't bring quite as much wow as a lot of the other clusters and such to the list. And since it is right next to B111, which is a Barnard object, maybe it become a sub-object of B111. And I agree with this, but see, for me, I think the object is the Scutum star cloud itself. And then we include these other objects as the sub-object. So I agree with what you're saying. It's just, I think if we say Scutum star cloud, like through a small wide field telescope, and then you can see the putter asterism, look for Basel 1 within the head of the putter, and then look for B111, wherever that is, just off the top of my head. I think it's to the northeast or something like that, which creates the contrast to see the Scutum star cloud itself. So in essence, it's impossible to see the Scutum star cloud without seeing B111. If you can't see either of those, really you're not getting like the full view of the Scutum star cloud. Like that's how you actually see it. I think that's what my goal of the list is, Shane, is to actually try to help convey how to see some of these things in the nighttime sky, but bit of a challenge.
For sure.
Stock 2, I'm sure you've seen Stock 2 a few times up there by the double cluster.
I have, yes.
Mm. So when we're looking at Stock 2, as Tyler points out, again, one of the things that really makes stock too, and you definitely said, oh yeah, yeah, I remember seeing that. Well, one of the reasons why is that we've got Barnard 201 right next to the double cluster, and that between the double cluster, the dark nebula, and stock 2, you get a nice contrasting effect, which makes these objects really pop. Like this is one of the reasons why they look the way they do in a wide field. And it looks really nice, like through binoculars. Like everybody likes to look at the double cluster through binoculars and see that sort of contrast between the set of clusters, the star trail that leads up to stock 2, and then just the whole general context. But that is in essence contrasted with the dark nebula, which kind of makes them pop a little bit more than they otherwise would. The California Nebula, have you seen that California Nebula?
Yeah, many times. Yep.
Yeah. And anyway, Tyler says that he recently learned there's a dark nebula within the California Nebula, but he hasn't seen it yet, and might be a fun sub-object to add. I think I went down this road before, and it's tough to see. I couldn't see it as a distinct object, but what I can see is I see like two waves in the California Nebula. And so it's sort of bright on either side, and then it's slightly darker in the center. And I think this thing kind of adds to that. It really tends to pop a little bit more in the images, but to the eye under a dark sky, for me, it kind of just merges with this general fall off in luminosity of the nebula itself. Not I don't know. Have you ever noticed any of these sort of details, Shane?
Well, I'm just looking at some images. Is the dark nebula kind of a black circle almost in the middle of it?
Almost. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be very difficult to pull out visually, if at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, always worth trying. I noticed it too, and I talked to I think the person I talked to was Alan Whitman, who's an associate editor at Sky and Telescope and has some years of experience over me. And I think he turned me towards somebody else. I think I talked to that person who's a very experienced observer as well. And like I couldn't really find anybody that had seen it in any sized instrument. Um, and I think what it boils down to is this California Nebula NGC 1499, or what is it, IC 1499, one or the other, is so large that you need a wide field to get as much of the nebula to get the contrast. You might be able to see it like if you had like a really fast, super wide field, like I don't know, like a 16 or 20-inch scope, but then you're not looking at the whole nebula, you're just kind of focused in on one part. Like that itself might require like a big instrument that is looking at a small part using like a 5 millimeter exopupil. That is sort of a question mark. Might go back to. Um, Tyler goes on to say, just a question. Think about, are there other catalogs or other types you think aspiring wide field observers should know about, or any other observing techniques or strategies? What objects do you want to include that you haven't observed yet? And he says, thank you so much for putting the list together. I have had a lot of fun working through a clear sky. So thanks for the reply, Tyler. Really appreciate it. Really like your suggestion about working in sub objects and recontextualizing some of the larger objects. And since I'm going to make some edits, if people want the original list, because if I make edits now, then the 2025 list that's in there will be the original list, and then that will go away 2026 going forward. So if you want a copy of this, you can just buy a copy of the Observer's Handbook. If you do go to buy it, I think people should put actual astronomy in the company name, and then that might highlight it for the office just to see how many people are actually buying after having heard it on the show. Certainly, if you want to write us and let you know you bought it as well, would be cool. But yeah, it's difficult to sort through the object catalogs. For the most part, looking at Malott for open clusters and sharpless objects for the large dispersed nebulae. Although there's some other ones as well, like the Barnard Dark Nebulae, as well as the Ruprecht Open Cluster Catalog, as well as like the Beverly Lind's dark nebulae. And it kind of goes on and on and on. Some of them have some pretty weird designations, like you know, IFNs, the Integrated Flux Nebula, the Mendel-Wilson catalog. It just kind of it's like this never-ending thing. And I think that's like the biggest challenge is kind of sorting it out. And he sent me some images, Shane, where he kind of put some circles on a bunch of different things. Said, what is this? And then, I kind of went through. You just end up having to go through each of those catalogs to figure out if it's a nebula or a cluster. You kind of can narrow it down. Uh, a little bit. But I think that's why, in essence, like the NGC and the Messier catalog are so popular. It kind of dispenses with all this sort of quasi-academic research trying to figure out what the heck any of this stuff is. And let me tell you this, Shane, there was a few objects that I had on my list for this past summer and the previous year, and I spent an awful long time tracking them down. And guess what I saw?
Nothing.
Nothing. Couldn't
Mhm.
You can't see them visually. They looked really good in some images, wide field images, looked really good in the ISO photos, and there was nothing. You couldn't see anything there. So there was a good open cluster there, just up past to the right of Cygnus. I forget what one that is. But I think it's going to go on the list.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but that's like that's part of astronomy to me is you still, give it a try and see what you can see. Because sometimes until you really are looking through a telescope, you don't know. You can certainly infer whether or not it should be possible, but some things you think you should see, you can't, and sometimes you're also surprised. So it just requires field work oftentimes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if I can find that cluster super quick right now. Have you ever dove into like what are the catalogs for the double clusters? Because I think it's kind of similar in a way.
Double cluster
Oh,
specific
sorry, not
catalogs?
double. I meant double stars. I'm doing three things.
Oh, like WDS is the biggest one.
Yeah, what's that?
Washington something something.
Oh yeah, the Washington Double Star catalog. Yeah, I think it's the NGC 6940. I was looking at two NGC 6940.
Struve designated doubles are another
Yeah,
popular one.
yeah. If people want to see a good wide field one that I don't think I have on the list though, and still high in the sky these nights. NGC 6940 looks like a star cloud in like the smaller telescopes, binoculars. Really nice binocular cluster there, just to the right or west of Veil Nebula.
Okay.
That's a good one. One more list.
One more list.
One more
Uh,
list. So this one, and I can't really, unless you buy the calendar, you really can't get it because even I really don't have it. But Marie Noonan, she's an experienced observer in Ontario, and I don't think I've ever met her in person, or if I did, it was an awful long time ago. But anyway, she's a very experienced observer, and particularly the moon and deep sky and some stars. And so chatted with her. I had an idea for something, but she kind of took it in a different direction. Gonna cough here. Mute it myself so I didn't blow your eardrums, Shane.
Appreciate that.
So what I wanted to put in a bunch of objects that just barely rise above the horizon here for us in northern North America.
Okay.
Because from here, like from places even just a little bit further south, you can kind of get Messier 7, Messier 6, like those two open clusters there on the bottom of sort of Scorpius Sagittarius region, much of the summer. But here it's a very limited period of time because of perpetual twilight, and they really don't stay above the horizon for very long. In fact, I think that like Messier 7 only comes up for like a few hours max on any given night. So I was thinking about that and the fact that when I go observing with newer observers, uh, many times I'll see people like looking at Messier 4 like in September or something when it's just barely above the horizon. So what I wanted to do was have a list that would note the best nights or the best new moon periods when these objects would be at their highest.
Okay.
And anyway, so Marie and I talked about it, and she said, "Well, that's fine. Let's not do too many though. Let's do more limited selections." So by limited, she still picked 3 dozen. I want to do like 50 or 100. She was like, We picked a few more and we narrowed it down to about 36. So that's a doable number.
Hmm.
But then she made a couple more lists, which kind of combine into this idea of when there's particular things to observe, which people may otherwise struggle to determine. Like I definitely would. Some cool stuff. Like some of the lunar rays are best seen on particular days, on particular months of the year. So she did all the determination for that. And so we put them in the calendar.
Okay. Neat.
She also put in certain libration features. Like I think probably I would be most familiar, maybe you have other ones, but like Mare Orientale,
Okay. Yep.
huge crater on the limb of the moon. There's some
Hmm.
librations. Libration is when we kind of can sort of see over the edge of the moon a little bit, where it's better than others. She figured out a bunch of those, put those in too.
Hmm.
And then when certain carbon stars, because I think many of the carbon stars are like variables. Anyway, she determined when certain carbon stars are either at their highest or at their best, or I don't know what her criteria was exactly. I didn't really get into it with her. I was just trying to gather all this stuff and put it in the calendar. But I think that it makes for some interesting things for people to observe, whether they're in the city and they want to just look at some of this lunar stuff or some of the carbon stars, or if you're going deep sky observing and you want to like get your Messiers or finest NGC objects or things of that nature. Kind of gives you a nice set of different and a real mix of objects, and this is the only place to get it is in the observer's calendar, because we're working on so many different spreadsheets. It's kind of a mess. So we just have some work this year just to clean those up to kind of replicate it for the following year. So it's really not even in all in one spot, other than if you go and buy a copy of the calendar.
I see. I see.
Yeah. So Shane, do you want to walk us through how you clean an eyepiece?
Yeah, sure. Um, I'm sure well, I know there's multiple methods. Like if you go to Astrophysics website or Teleview's website, they all have different instructions or somewhat similar instructions, slight variances. Mine's pretty basic. I just take an air blower that you get at your local drugstore, blow off any sort of debris that I can. Then I have a like photography lens brush that I'll lightly brush across the surface of the eyepiece just to dislodge any other debris that might be there. And then because I may have loosened some of that, I'll hit it again with the air bulb. But once all of that is done, then it's just take some lens wipes that you would use for like eyeglasses. I bought a big box of Zeiss wipes for $10, I think, from a local photography store. They work quite well because they'll clean the lens, like they'll take oils off, but they also usually have like a streak-free sort of compound to them, so that there's really no like nothing left behind. And that probably cleans 95% of anything that I encounter. And if there is something that seems to be stuck onto the eyepiece, just a little bit of saliva usually is enough to loosen it, or maybe some light rubbing with just like the flesh of like your finger or thumb. And once it's removed, then you can again reapply a Zeiss wipe or a lens wipe to kind of get rid of any smudges or streaks, and then you're good to go. So it's really not that difficult. And in my opinion, it's pretty hard to damage an eyepiece as long as there's no like dirt or anything sort of hard or abrasive. Otherwise, they're quite resilient.
I almost never clean my eyepieces.
Oh, okay.
I just typically leave them alone and try not to use them outside of the really good nights. But maybe I should. I was often thinking about getting there's like a spray on plastic or something you can kind of spray on and then peel off. Have you ever played around with any of that stuff?
Never. No, never heard of it. Does it, do some people use that for cleaning optics or?
Yeah, I've read about it on cloudy nights at one point. I thought
Oh,
that
neat.
sounded pretty neat. I bought some of the I think it's called ROR solution or something like
Yep.
that.
Yep. Yep. That's another popular one.
Yeah, so but anyway, I should start with some of my older Pentax eyepieces because I've had some of them for like 20 years now or something, and should just bite the bullet and try cleaning them up with some of that stuff. So,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, it can
And
make a difference, particularly on brighter objects.
mm,
Your planetary contrast can be impacted sometimes if you have a dirty eyepiece, and even like nebula spotting, particularly like in the Pleiades. I think that many times, probably more than not, people are actually seeing dirty eyepieces instead of the nebula around the brighter stars there, because that nebulosity can be sometimes challenging to tease out. And again, if your optics are not clean, it sort of takes on a bit of a nebulous appearance, no matter what you're looking at, as long as it's bright.
hmm, interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, well, certainly that's helpful, but no objective. I've never touched an objective lens. Typically, I find, they don't really get that dirty.
No, they
Not
don't.
that I've,
Especially if you're keeping the dew off of them, they
yeah.
they tend to stick or stay in really good condition. I did have issues a little bit with mirrors on the big Dobsonians, and I think it's largely because you're kind of kicking up dust around the mirror box down there as you're just walking around.
And they're down low.
Yeah, yeah, and those can be a little tricky. I've definitely scratched a mirror before trying to clean it. So those, if you are trying to clean a mirror, I suggest you watch a lot of YouTube videos and research on the best way to do it so you don't make it worse by causing some permanent, scratches or damage.
Yeah, that would be my concern. I did have one eyepiece that got really dirty, and we ended up crushing it in a vise, a Teleview 32 millimeter Plossl.
Hmm.
Just as we were trying to both. I think somehow we got the field lens dirty, so we wanted to get out of the barrel, and then it was stuck. So we thought, oh well, it'll unthread. And my friend Tim was a motorcycle mechanic and a very good one, and very good with mechanics and everything, and just very gently trying to turn it, and it just popped, and we thought it was coming loose, but it was like the lens actually fractured. So sort of a bit of a sad one there.
Hmm.
So you got to be careful with this stuff. You don't
You
want to
do.
end up crushing your eyepiece in a vise somehow just because you were trying to clean it.
Well, and
Um,
be careful if you're taking a barrel off or disassembling the eyepiece in any way, because there's multiple elements in an eyepiece, and if they come out, they have to go back in the exact same way with the right spacing, like spacers and all of that kind of stuff. And if you mess any of that up, you will be pretty sad when you try to look through that eyepiece because it won't work.
yeah, I get it. I shouldn't even tell. This is a terrible story. This doesn't paint me in a good light.
Oof,
But I
now I'm
was
intrigued.
I was observing with somebody once, and I'm pretty sure they don't listen to the show. I don't think they're into astronomy anymore. Maybe they do, but um, they decided to get into astronomy in a big way. So they were just starting out, and and maybe I didn't quite realize this, right? Because typically people don't do this. So really, even before they were like, I'm going to get into astronomy, and they went out and bought like a whole set of Ethos eyepieces.
Mm,
The whole like how much
that's a
that was
big investment.
a big investment, and they bought I forget the telescope, beautiful whatever the telescope was. It was all like this everything top of line stuff I'd never even seen before. They just went online. What's the best eyepieces? Everything right from the 3.7 ethos all the way up to the 21, like the whole kit and caboodle. I don't know, bought like Takahashi TSA 120 or astrophysics. It was something crazy. It was brand new though. Somehow they were able to get it pretty quick. So it must have been Takahashi or something. Anyway, it just kind of went on and on and on. And so we went out and perhaps even though I kind of knew this, I just for some reason in my mind you would treat somebody that had all this stuff as somebody that knew and the person very clearly didn't. And so they were asking me, I was observing and they were asking me all these questions and something about like a 2 inch to 1 1/4, right? And you're
Okay.
thinking adapter. And I said, well, typically you can just remove those and use your 2 inch eyepieces, or if it's 1 1/4, you can use them in a 2 inch. Okay.
Hmm.
Keep in mind this is like late at night in the dark and everything, and some way somehow you end up unthreading the 1 1/4 inch piece or the 2 inch piece for an ethos 3.7.
Okay.
And I did, like, who would have known, but like the whole optical elements just kind of poured out of it.
Oh, geez.
So anyway, it was yeah, it was quite the thing. I felt pretty bad, but like I said, I didn't know exactly. I thought we were talking about like an adapter. I thought it was more of an adapter versus a like the way they're set up. I'd never even seen something like that before, but I kind of was observing and was sort of telling him, oh well, you can just usually there's a screw, you undo the screw and you just pull the 2 inch adapter off, hey?
Hmm.
And when I said that, there was a screw apparently. He undid the screw or unthreaded it somehow, and I heard like this weird sound of clinkling, you know, hundreds of dollars of glass sprinkling out of the out of the ethos. But
Oof, that's rough.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, but I'm careful not to give such advice now under the darkness of skies, but to pay a little bit more closer attention to what people are asking me when I do observe with people who are relatively new. But that'll probably never happen again.
Hmm.
And I think they observed like 3 times and gave up.
Ooh, that's rough.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of sad. But anyway, I don't know why I went there, but it's sort of a bit of a interesting story, I think. Bit of an
Sure. Yeah.
yeah. Anything else, Shane?
That is all.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Please be sure and subscribe to our podcast. You can always send us show ideas, observations, and questions to actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.